Father, thank you so much for the life that you granted us, the air that we have to breathe, and for giving us the liberty to come together in this nation to serve you, to figure out how it is to serve you in a manner that you've called each one of us individually. For your glory's sake, Lord, we ask you to be with Oakpack and the people that are here. May be edified of you in all things we say and do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
All right. Today, the reason you came was to hear Georgia Williams on a very, very important topic. You know, our House leadership has been kind of laying behind the doors, closed doors, some groundwork to change what was a long time ago State Question 640, which set up a vote to raise taxes at 75%. I mean, 75%. Of those present and voting, and they want to lower that to 60, you know, to raise more money rather than sell off stuff that we shouldn't be doing in the first place. So Georgia Williams was in on the ground floor of 640 when it came to be, and I don't want to steal much of her thunder. But we wanted to let you know, and John has had it out in the newsletter, you know, that hey, this is working behind the scenes, and you need to know what they may be planning to do and trying to do. Well, who is Georgia Williams? Man, if you don't know Georgia Williams, I don't know where you've been living. She's down in the Lawton area, Comanche County down there. Many years ago, she was a charter member of STOP. That's Stop Taxing Our People. How about that, huh? And that was years ago when you couldn't say that without being crucified, you know. And oh, yeah, she says she was only in grade school then, you know, but she was a real advocate. Boy, she's a prodigy there. She worked first in subsequent campaigns for Senator Jim Inhofe, Congressman J.C. Watts, Governor Frank Keating, just lots of other local and state campaigns since then. I know when we first got back into Oklahoma, sometimes she'd be double booked. She had promised to take us around and look at houses down in Lawton, but other people were calling, like J.C. Watts, and hey, can you pick me up at the airport, you know? And J.C. always calls Georgia first when he's in that part of the state. And I think there's three reasons, you know. She knows the strategy. It's very important. She has her finger on the pulse of stuff that's happening down there. She knows where the money is, you know, and where it might be turned loose. And she knows the good places to eat, you know, Solace's, for example, down there. So JC always checks in with her. She's had the privilege on numerous occasions to serve as a spokesperson for Comanche County Republican Party. She has served in so many roles: state committee woman, district committee woman, county vice chair, county chair, and she's currently the vice chair for Comanche County. See, I have finally changed my vocabulary. I would tell people I'm from Comanche County. Even living up here, it was hard for me to change these habits. All right. She, for a long time, co-hosted. I was going to mention this, and lo and behold, who shows up today but her co-host, Steve Fair. And they were on the radio down there. It was called The Grapevine. They did that for 3.5 years. And what a hoot that was. And hubby Bill Williams here, Catfish Willie, spun the records in between callers, and it was stuff that everybody in this room would have loved. I think there were 45s, weren't they, Bill? Yeah. Well, Georgia is still at it today. She says she's not as active as she always has been, but she truly is, because she's for less government, lower taxes, preserving our constitutional rights. Polly Pat, that's John's mom, and of course I'm the dad. You know, I'm Mr. Polly Pat. When we were married in February of 1973 on a Saturday, we went on our honeymoon to Lawton, Oklahoma, and on Sunday, the day after our marriage, we went to church, and that's when we met Georgia and Bill. A couple of years later, John comes along and was born there in Comanche County Memorial down there, and I'm at church and I'm announcing this newborn, and his name is John Shipley Mitchner. We deliberated over that name for quite a while, John Shipley. Shipley's a family name from the family in Texas. Thought it sounded pretty neat because if he wanted to become a college vice president or a bank VP, he could change his name, become J. Shipley Michener. That's what you do. You put the initial at the beginning, when you're somebody important, And if you're not important already, you can just change your name, and then usually you percolate right on up to the top, J. Shipley Michener. Well, Georgia heard that name. She went, John Shipley Michener. How pretentious is that? I'm going to call him Shipshape. And I think Shipshape is probably more appropriate because it's not pretentious but portentous of some of the things that he's doing today. All right. So now you know the secret's out of the bag. His real name is Shipshape for those of us who are close to him. But would you please welcome our very special guest today, Georgia Williams.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. I do want to say up front I'm not used to working with a mic, so you all let me know if you can't hear or something along that line. Yes, I've known Bob and Polly Pat a long, long time. I refer to her as P, and of course Bob, and we've had some really good times over the years till they had to move away. But I want to thank all of you today for asking me to come speak. This is a subject that, like I said, I was in on the ground floor, and it's very important to me, and I think you'll see after what I give you here today how important it really is for our state. But I want to introduce my husband. I think he's been introduced, Bill. Bill and I have sort of worked as a team since we first got involved in things political, and he's been a great help to me. I hope I have to him, and I love him and appreciate him very much. And Gary Jones is a longtime friend from our area of the state. He's doing a fantastic job as auditor. He's running for governor, and we really do wish Gary well. He has a lot to offer our state. And of course, Steve Fair. And Steve Fair is, there's just not any others like Steve Fair, and we had a fantastic time on the radio. Time would, and interest would probably fail to tell you all the great fun we had. But we had a 2-hour call-in radio talk show every Saturday morning. Had 2 hours straight through. We bought the time. They blocked it off for us. We wrote all our own copy. We wrote our commercials. And I think we disseminated over those 2 years, 2-3 years, some great information. We had every political figure in Oklahoma from the governor to the janitor. And we just had great time, and I do think we did a lot of good in Oklahoma. I think it helped considerably. So that being said, I'm going to, I don't know if you happen to see this article, but Representative Harold Wright has decided or has introduced House Joint Resolution 1032, which would send to the people an opportunity to vote to change the constitutional amendment, State Question 640. And I certainly disagree with Mr. Wright. He wants to change it to 60%, and some even want to change it as much as down to a simple majority. I don't know that I would want to live in a state where just half of the legislature were making the decisions. Seems like it would sort of disenfranchise a large segment of the population. And I don't think 60% is very realistic either. So I want you to be aware that that is in the works. Wanted you to know that. And I did put together a letter, a rebuttal of sorts to Mr. Wright, and I have some copies of it there if you'd like to have it when you go. I'm going to take you back to the beginning and tell you how State Question 640 came to be. We were not politically involved. We were registered Democrats. Of course, back in the day, if you didn't register Democrat, you didn't vote, because we didn't have many Republicans, certainly didn't have any from southwest Oklahoma at that time. Now we've had all offices there except one, and he's fixing to be termed hooray. But be that as it may, we get a call from a representative, state representative from the Lawton area, well, from Lawton. His name was Butch Hooper. And Butch was serving in the legislature, and while he was not a close friend, he was an acquaintance, and he was a local businessman. And of course, we were in business in Lawton. My husband is a pharmacist by schooling. We had drugstores in Lawton, and in the early 60s, he became involved in commercial real estate in our own properties. So Butch calls us, and he said, I think you all would like to know the legislature is fixing to pass the largest tax hike that there's ever been in the state of Oklahoma. And we all know what it was for. It was for the children and for education. And those have certainly come to be bad words in the last few years. So he says, they're fixing to pass this, and he said, I just thought you would want to know that. So we thanked Butch, not sure why he called us, but he did. So we got to talking about it there in Lawton and surrounding area with friends of ours, people we knew, and said, you know, this is really going to be a deal. They're going to tax this, 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 and this. So right about that same time, or pretty quickly, an article comes out in the paper, and we find out that there are people in the Norman and Oklahoma City area that are also talking about this and kind of wondering if this is a good plan for the state of Oklahoma. So to cut to the chase, we get together, and we had some meetings in Lawton. We had most of our meetings in Norman. But we get together, a group of like-minded persons that are concerned about this tax hike, and we decide that we're going to try to repeal House Bill 1017. Now, in Oklahoma, we're very, very fortunate that we have the right to circulate an initiative petition to either get things on the ballot or to remove things that the legislature has passed. And that's also a privilege and a right that we have in Oklahoma that we need to zealously guard, because we're one of the few states that has that prerogative, and they try every once in a while to alter that, to change that, and I'm sure they'd love to do away with it. So we need to be careful of that also. So we start meeting in the offices of Stan Ward in Norman. He's an attorney. We had B.J. Brockett out of Oklahoma City, an attorney. We had Gary Gardenhire, an attorney, who had also served in the legislature. We had a woman by the name of Duchess Bartimus, who was a constitutional attorney and authority, and we sat down to try to repeal House Bill 1017 and these massive, massive tax hikes. Now, the tax hikes, they were asking for $350 million in tax increases, plus an additional $50 million from the rainy day fund, plus increments over 5 years, making a total of $700 million per year increase thereafter. That's a lot of money, folks, and this is 30 years ago. That is a ton of money. Later on, when we got to looking at it and really got down in the feathers of the situation, there was only a small percentage of that actually going to education. The rest of it was going into the general fund, which I have long contended is nothing but a money laundering machine for the state of Oklahoma. So the legislature, I'm not going to say they lie, but they don't tell the whole picture. They don't tell the whole story. They left an awful lot unsaid. So we're meeting to try to figure out how to repeal this, and Duchess Bartimus and Stan Ward are working on it, because when you circulate an initiative petition, you have to be prepared to defend it against those who are going to try to get it kicked out. And we knew they would, especially the education establishment, and they did. Then you appear before the state Supreme Court to plead your case. So we were trying to dot all of our I's, cross all of our T's, and this took some time to get that actual petition put together, and we were going to circulate that statewide with volunteers. Well, while we're working on that, we're sitting there talking like you do, and we're thinking, what can we do to stop this from happening again? No input from the people. Actually, they put it before the legislature to let the people vote on it, and of course that was voted down. The Democrats were in control at that time, and they had no intentions of letting the people have a say about much of anything. So that was voted down. So we get to thinking, how can we stop this from happening in the future, these massive, massive tax hikes with virtually just no input from the people? So that's when we started working on what became known as State Question 640. Now, the same attorneys and the same people are putting this together. I think they did a splendid job. They had input from all of us. We were running back and forth, Bill and I, to Norman, at least about twice a month, having meetings with Stop New Taxes. That was the name that we picked for our group. Stop New Taxes, stop taxing our people. So they put together State Question 640, and this is the actual reading. These are leaflets that we passed out. Let those who pay have a say. Love that saying, still love it. Think it's apropos today. But the amendment says, shall an amendment to Section 33 of Article 5 of the Oklahoma Constitution, which would require any bill passed by the legislature intended to raise revenue for support of state government, should that be submitted to a vote of the people at the next general election before it can become effective? Authorizing enactment of revenue-raising bills without a vote of the people if 3/4 of the members of each house approve the bill and it is sent to the governor for appropriate action, and requiring that such bill not become effective for 90 days and removing the authority of the legislature to prevent a referendum vote through enactment of an emergency clause, should this be adopted. So basically what it did, revenue-raising bills have to pass by 75%, or they can be referred to a vote of the people. And it also did away with the enactment of the emergency clause, which would have not given people time to circulate petition had they wanted to do so. So we decided we'll circulate these two petitions together, 640 and repeal of House Bill 1017. So everyone's saying can't be done, never been done, if you watch Seinfeld. And we are determined that we're going to get this done. And people by that time were really hot about all of the taxes and this huge tax increase, and nobody's been consulted, and it's really going to work a hardship on a lot of people in a lot of areas. So we get it all ready to go to circulate, and that's what we did. We circulated it all over the state of Oklahoma. Bill and I, I don't know if any of the rest of you were here and worked on it. We stood out in parking lots, got a terrific sunburn. Anyway, we stood in parking lots, we stood in bad weather. We had some who tromped out through fields to rural areas. I had a friend of ours, George Derby. George and V. Derby lived at Apache, and they became members of Stop. And George said, I've had the dog sicked on me. He said, I've been cussed out, and I've had doors slammed in my face. But he said, we got the signatures. But anyway, there were a lot of good times, and there were a lot of kind of gloomy times because, you didn't know. But one thing I will say about this effort and about working on campaigns, you meet some really nice people. There's very seldom a stinker in the bunch, occasionally, but we met a lot of nice people. They became lifelong friends, and we enjoyed it so much. We were inexperienced, didn't know doodly. We were registered as Democrats. In the mid-90s, we changed our registration to Republican. But one fella in particular, back up here a little bit, Tom Pate was from Wilburton, Oklahoma. Had never met Tom Pate. He'd been involved in various political causes through the years, a lot longer than we had. Anyway, Tom Pate had been appointed by Governor Henry Bellman to serve on Task Force 2000. Task Force 2000 was charged with bringing this to the people. It was supposed to be legislative ideas, thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Tom Pate caught on very, very quickly and, in fact, resigned from the committee. He and Henry Bellman were good friends. Governor Bellman had appointed him. He wrote a letter to Governor Bellman about the problems with it. He wrote a larger expose. This is a copy of the letter to Bellman. I have the other at home, but it was too lengthy to get into. But it became very, very clear into just a few weeks of meetings with Task Force 2000. This was not something that Oklahoma or Oklahoma legislators or anybody in Oklahoma put together. This was teacher union agenda. It had already been passed in Iowa. It had been passed in another state or two. They were going state by state trying to implement this into the curriculum and the state government let the taxpayers pay for it. Most of what it did, or a lot of what it did, it created situations where you had to hire more personnel, more teachers, more whatever, help the teachers union grow. That was their overall goal. But Tom Pate was no idiot, and he very quickly saw what was going on, and he came and joined our STOP group to help us try to repeal this bill because it had already been passed. He tried to get audiences at that time. Senate Pro Tem was Bob Cullison, good Democrat. Speaker Steve Lewis. Steve Lewis went on and ran for governor, and fortunately did not win. But, my opinion. But anyway, Tom Pate joined our group, and he was a wealth of knowledge on what had actually happened with the House Bill 1017, which certainly gave us great ammunition for our State Question 640. Had all these things foisted upon you, you know, when you had no say and blah, blah, blah. And then turns out it's not even really going where they told you it was going to go. You know, the larger majority of it was going to fund general government. So we appreciated Tom very much. He's deceased now, and I'm very sorry because he was not only very, very knowledgeable, he was a very, very nice person. And I have to mention Bob Creason from Norman. Bob was just, man, he was just right on everything like a duck on a June bag. And loved Bob, and he became a very good friend, and sadly, he is also deceased. But anyway, we went to work, and we got the information, ballot title, whatever you want to call it, on a petition set to go. We thought it would pass muster. We got the one done for 640, and we've sent people out there with these two petitions. You know, I think we had to have to repeal House Bill 17, I want to say we had to have close to 100,000 signatures. I think on 640 it was about 175,000, and the only reason I know that is because I went back through my files, or I would never remembered. We started in May of 1990, had 90 days to collect those signatures. Well, we got them turned in. Then you have to wait on the Secretary of State to certify that everything's on the up and up, blah, 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 allow for your period of protest from whoever. Well, we had problems from the get-go. The Secretary of State, Hannah Atkins, she was dragging her feet. You know, the powers that be didn't want this, and so she's dragging and she's holding back as much as she can. So we're waiting and we're waiting. Well, we come to find out that she's releasing this information, copies of our petitions, copies of the people who signed this petition to Gene Stipe was one of them, some of the other big movers and shakers in the legislature and the government. Well, we find out that people who've signed our petition and some that, you know, were involved are getting threatening phone calls. Yeah. And so this went on real big over in Little Dixie. And so anyway, we filed a lawsuit. Stan Ward was our main attorney out of Norman, and so he's filing a lawsuit because they're releasing this information prematurely and they're not giving us the facts. So anyway, we'll cut to the chase, and we got that taken care of, we'll put it that way. And it went on to the Supreme Court. And those protested who did, which was primarily the education establishment. And so we have to appear before the state Supreme Court to plead for our petitions. And so Bill and I get up bright and early and dress up in our Sunday bestus. I've never been to the Supreme Court. And we drive to Oklahoma City and we meet Stan Ward. And there weren't a lot of us who went. I think maybe 6 or 8 people. And I don't remember who else. Bob Creason was there, I'm sure. But anyway, Stan argues our case before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court was very interesting. There was a gentleman from Lawton who was on the court at that time, John Doolin. And John, I think, slept through most of it. He appeared to. And one of them kept getting up, going out behind the curtain, you know, periodically. I don't know if he was smoking, drinking, whatever he was doing. I shouldn't say that. He probably was just yawning and scratching. But anyway, so we finally get our case made. And we've said all we can say, and we've done all we can do, and we accomplished what they said could not be done. Volunteers, 2 statewide petitions simultaneously, and bottom line is we got the job done. So we wait for the Supreme Court to render their decision, and I don't remember how long it was. That part I do not remember. It wasn't long, and they come back in our favor. You know, so we're static, to say the least. So when the questions finally appear on ballot, we had raised over $100,000 from donations and that type thing to make a final push before we went to the polls on House Bill 1017. I think if we'd had about 2 more weeks, it was starting to turn against 1017. You know, when you say it's for the children and for education, then everybody feels really, really bad, you know, if they don't support it. So we could see the tide was turning. We had the money. Well, there was a fella that had been involved kind of from the beginning with it, and frost your flakes, he stole $100,000 and ran off. And so that pretty well shot us in the foot. We didn't have time to raise any more money before voting day, and that really did hurt us. I think we lost the question because of that, because it was defeated barely as far as repealing. They voted not to repeal. But State Question 640 passed overwhelmingly. And really, of the two, if you had to pick, I'd have taken 640, because that has been a great tool to slow our legislature down, to stop them to some extent. And not too long after the bill was passed, Helen Cole, Congressman Cole's mother, who'd served in the state Senate, she said, "You better be glad you got it passed." And we were. We could already see the handwriting on the wall after House Bill 1017. So it passed, and, you know, some in the legislature are still wearing black crepe to this day. And so that's their prerogative, but it's been wonderful for the people of Oklahoma. Now, Representative Wright says he wants to lower it to 60%, like the school bond issues. So I told Mr. Wright there in my letter I put together that the 60% is there for a reason. It's there to help compensate for those who vote to raise your property taxes, but they don't own any property. But they still get to vote. So that compensates for that. It was apples and oranges. It has nothing to do with State Question 640. There has been all kinds of legislation passed that got a 75% majority. Actually, I think that's being very, very gracious and generous to allow 75%. I don't want to live in a state where just half the legislature makes the decisions, and 60% is not much better. Now, that's my opinion, and that's my sort of at least halfway educated opinion on what goes on in our state. So I hope when and if this comes up, I hope we can keep it from even going to ballot. One of the great thing, well, it's great that we have right to initiative petition in Oklahoma, and I wouldn't take for that right. But it's a two-edged sword, because while you have the right, your people who are voting need to be educated about what the issue is. That's like on state questions, because we have people call all the time and say, what is this? What does it mean? What's it going to do? And that is a problem. Now, I was told, I don't know if this is true, but I was told in California, when they have state questions, the state is required to send to each registered voter, it's probably why they're out of money, a booklet explaining the state question, or whatever proposition it is, and what it will do, what it won't do, etc., so that the voters can make a knowledgeable, decision. However, I have found, even working with our own group at home, I don't think too many people are reading this day and time, so I don't know that that would be a big help. But people do need to be educated. When you go to vote, you really do need to know what you're voting on, and they've gotten a little better in the last few years about making sure that the ballot title is clear and concise, and it's not a vote yes for a no and vice versa. So anyway, I hope you will watch in case they succeed in getting that on ballot. I think it would be a huge mistake for Oklahoma to go to 60% and, heaven forbid, to a just simple majority. I think it would be very detrimental to our voters and our citizens, because our legislature, it seems year after year, obligate us for more than we can afford to pay. So it might be a good time for government to step back and look at exactly what government should be providing and maybe get out of some areas that they shouldn't be in the first place. Because it's obvious there is not enough money to give everybody what they want. So I hope this has been informative. That's how 640 came to be. We worked on it from the beginning. We were charter members of STOP. It was a wonderful experience. It was a very big learning experience. And I hope that the people of Oklahoma will continue to guard the rights and privileges they have, like I said, as far as initiative, petition, and other things, because we're rare that we have those in the state of Oklahoma. But I thank you for asking me to speak. I don't think I have anything else that could pertain to it. State Question 640 was just a simple, straight-up situation. It is what it is. It does what it says. And I think it has been great for us. I hope that we will keep it. But I thank you for asking me to speak, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if you have any.
Yeah, we have a few moments, so if you have a question, let me know, and I'll be coming around.
Now, you say you have a sample letter here for us to use?
Yes,
okay,
yes,
great.
yes, I do. It's more or less a rebuttal that I wrote in regard to our rights request. It's published on McCarville's website under that particular question about right, and passed it out to friends and family, that kind of thing. But
all right.
I would say, questions. I'm sorry. First of all, you brought one of your original pamphlets.
Yes.
Do you have more of those? I'd love.
No.
Well, I want to take a picture of it at least before we.
Sure.
Anyway,
I'm sorry.
I remember helping to circulate petitions on it and
bless you.
But I would say is that, and you would I think agree is that 640 worked, especially this last year, exactly as it was intended. There's nothing wrong with it. There was never the intent was exactly what has transpired.
Well, I think you can see by House Bill 1017, if we didn't have 640, you could just expect House Bill 1017s every year. They'd be taxing us out of our socks.
Yeah. Stephanie?
Yes, I heard about something. I read something a couple of days ago, and I can't find it real quick, but something about Step Up Oklahoma, that group. Yeah. Is that anything to do with this?
No. Step Up Oklahoma would like to water it down to 60%, maybe simple majority. They also want to water down term limits. They want to expand them from 12 to 16 years. And they have several other, they want to increase personal personal taxes, state taxes in Oklahoma. If you look at all the things they've listed, I told someone, I said, this is a return to the past. This is the Democratic rhetoric of the 80s, the 90s. It didn't work then, and it won't work now. And so I appreciate them getting together, but this is a group of Democratic millionaires, billionaires, and I'm sure Mr. Rainbow's not going to be affected if his state taxes are raised, but a lot of people will be. And then all of this, corporations were going to tax them or whatever. Everybody over third grade knows that corporations don't pay taxes. They're passed on through to the consumer. But no, I'm not agreeing with Step Up. They need to step down as far as I'm concerned. But that's my opinion. Yes. 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 Yeah. So I'm sure they'll be, for the most part, very favorable, and I'm sure OETA will also be very favorable. Back when we had our campaign office a couple of years ago down Lawton, and we'll have one again this fall, I made a big circle with OETA, and I put a slash through it because they lean so far left.
Any other questions for Georgia? Bill? Okay, let me come with the mic, Catfish. Catfish Willie.
Thank you. If you notice, at each general election that we have, there are state questions on the back of the ballot, and what does amount to anything that's a revenue-raising thing goes to a vote of the people at that time because of State Question 640. Yeah. They couldn't raise that revenue just by passing the bill and getting the governor to sign it. Because of State Question 640, you, the people, get to vote on those issues. We tried to include fees in our original petition, but we sort of voted that down. Not only we were trying to get taxes and fees, but they now excuse me, they've bypassed us by doing the fee deal. Anyway.
Well, I would like to point out, and I didn't, the debacle at the health department, had it not been for State Question 640, I don't know that that would have ever come to light, because they would have just passed some tax revenue and shifted it over there, and there it would have been. It would have been covered up, and you wouldn't have known. So 640, like I said, it's been a great tool for us. It's been a stopgap, and I would hate to live here if it gets repealed or watered down. It'll just be a nightmare.
Yeah, if you didn't hear, what Bill was saying was they tried to initially get fees put in there. You couldn't raise a fee, like they tried to call a tax a fee and then get it across so it doesn't require a vote of the people. So, but they were not able to do that. Other questions for anybody who's here? I know that probably some of the expense for California, you say they're out of money and they ship those pamphlets out, they probably staple little baggies of samples to those pamphlets, don't they,
Well,
a garden variety, organic, or whatever, yeah.
Well, like I mentioned in the letter thing there I wrote, if they could get rid of 640, it would just allow them to continue to grow government at rates that the taxpayers can't sustain, folks. Part of that in that letter is geared to my particular area of living. Figures just came out that Lawton, in the last 3 years, we've lost 5% of our population. And the fellow who was the manager at the Goodyear plant there, in a speech that he gave back in October, he said in southwest Oklahoma, the income is $8,000 below state level and $17,000 below the national level. Now, we're hurting in southwest Oklahoma. We don't need a tax increase. That's not going to help us. All of these figures, or part of these figures, came about because Lawton's not growing. We've got tons of empty houses and buildings sitting in Lawton. And of course, our revenue and our livelihoods have always been very closely tied to Fort Sill. Well, Fort Sill is now down, thanks to previous administrations and others, but we've got some problems down there, and a lot of our little satellite communities are drying up. They're going away. They're moving off to the big city because they can't make a living there. The town of Frederick is circulating a petition to change their form of city government, either from a manager to a council or vice versa, city manager, whatever, in hopes of jump-starting their economy. So we have places in Oklahoma that are hurting who need help. They don't need higher taxes to try to contend with. So anyway, that is in the letter I did, but like I said, it was kind of geared to the local area. But anyway.
Okay, this has all been very good information. Please thank Georgia for all of her wisdom that comes our way. Thank you very much, Georgia.